Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In a previous video, I showed how I went about installing the back scene for Shelfington. In this video, I'm going to determine if an idea I have for installing a removable scenic breakboard will work or not. I'd had various ideas about what I could make the scenic breakboard from. I was initially thinking of using MDF or plywood, but given my lack of skill with a jigsaw, I thought they would be too difficult to work with when cutting out portals or tunnels. My next thought was of using a thick grey board, something between 3 and 5 millimeters perhaps. The only problem with grey board was that I wasn't sure how it would react when it got wet. For instance, when adding watered down PVA to it, when adding scenic details, or when it was painted using watered down acrylic. Would it retain its shape, or would it warp, for instance? I was all set to start working with grey board when I suddenly had a thought. Why not use XPS foam? It was easy to cut, easy to shape, and was quite happy when used in conjunction with a number of different glues, paints and sealers. I already had some 10mm thick 4-foot by 2-foot sheets at my disposal, so I decided that I'd try and mock up a mechanism for using it to provide a removable scenic breakboard. The first job was to cut some foam that would go along the back of the layout. This would be at a height of 60mm and would need to be deep enough to accommodate the track that formed the small fiddle yard and passing loops along the back wall. To make sure I allowed enough room for this, I decided to print out the track plan for that area of the layout. This turned out to be way more problematic than it should have been. I initially decided to use borderless printing so I wouldn't have to cut the white borders off each page, which would make joining the sheets of paper relatively simple. However, while the Rail Modeler Pro software I use could be configured for borderless printing, the printouts themselves turned out too big and had missing details. Despite my best efforts, I just couldn't get the borderless printing to work, so had to resort to printing with borders. Of course, I then had to use a modelling knife to cut off the top and left-hand edges of each page. This was a time-consuming business and introduced small errors into each page, which was why I wanted to use borderless printing in the first place. Never mind, I pressed on. Next I stuck adjoining sheets from the plan together using sticky tape, being careful to ensure that the faint 6-inch grid lines were indeed 6 inches apart. The grid lines are actually quite difficult to see on the video, so I'll point some out using these red arrows. Once I finally had the back layer of sheets attached to each other, I could transport them to the train room and position them on top of the XPS foam. You can see here that I've placed some track onto the printout just to reassure myself that the track plan has been printed to the correct scale. So, now I had a great idea of where the track would go and hence where I'd be able to place the scenic breakboard and avoid the track. Next I used the printout to mark out the position of the scenic breakboard onto the foam so I could cut it down to size. I did this with 2 pieces of foam using my usual method of scoring the foam several times using a steel ruler and a utility knife before simply snapping the foam to get a clean break. Eventually I'll be gluing the 2 pieces of foam together using Gorilla Wood glue, but for the time being I held the pieces together with some long pins. Next I turned my attention to the scenic breakboard itself, and had cut some strips of the 10mm thick foam sheets that were 9 inches and 6 inches high. I stood the 9-inch board on its side and positioned it up against the foam behind it, then sandwiched it in place with more foam in front of it. As you can see, it was far too tall. So next I tried the 6-inch high board. You can see that as well as it being the perfect height, it was easy to replace. I also found that I could reach over the board easily should I need to retrieve any derailed stock. My next job was to cut tunnel portals into the Scenic breakboard and position it across some actual track. This gave me a great feel for how wide the tunnel portals would need to be to allow coaches to run through, and gave me a few ideas about maybe bringing the portals further forward on the left hand side of the layout. Next, I used some double-sided sticky tape and long pins to temporarily attach the foam to the baseboard to make sure it didn't move, and so it also wedged in the Scenic breakboard. Finally, I tried removing and replacing the board a few times to determine if it would work as a removable structure, and rather thought that it might just work. Now, while all of this has been one big experiment and everything is basically loosely held in position with double-sided sticky tape and pins, I think it has been an incredibly useful exercise and I feel I've learned a lot from it. My next step will be to build the complete layout but only on one level, without gradients and using as few droppers as possible just to see if it works as well as I hope it will. Okay, so that's about it for this update. Please let me know if you can think of a better way of creating the Scenic breakboard. Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a beginner in N-Gage modelling, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comments section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update on my progress soon. Bye.